Good evening, I'm Jay Aiyer.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. Welcome to Houston Public Media's web series, Political Perspectives.
Tonight we'll continue the conversation from Red, White, and Blue on the race for president. Let's get started. Brandon, we've seen some pretty interesting changes. We've got a completed race on the Republican side, a presumptive nominee that is trying to bring his party back together, and an ongoing crazy race on the Democratic side.
Yeah. Here's my question for you. Does Trump really change the electoral map? This is part of the story that people have put out there, that Trump can actually do better, say, than Romney and outperform McCain in terms of how the states are organized and how he wins. I wonder, because the problem is that most of the time states from year to year don't change that much. There's a kind of national trend which goes up or down for Democrats or Republicans, and the states individually are voting pretty much the same way. Do you think that Trump changes the map in a significant enough way that he could actually win the presidency?
You know, I guess that's the $64,000 question, right? I mean, I think it's a different map. We've been programmed the last few years to think, okay, Colorado, New Mexico, Florida, Virginia, and of course, always Ohio. Well, I think this time the map with Trump is just different, right? It's a Rust Belt, Midwestern strategy. Colorado is essentially gone, right? New Mexico will be gone. Florida, even though the initial sort of read looks like it may be closer, is probably gone, largely because Trump is so weak among Latino voters and has a huge historical gender gap. But where he's strong is among white working class voters, right? Non-college educated voters. Highest concentration are in the Rust Belt. Add to that African-American voters, he may outperform Romney in that. Is that enough to bridge that gap, to make up that difference? I think that's really going to be the question in the race.
Yeah. Do you think this changes his design in terms of how to think about a vice president? Because he is weak, as you say, in some areas, right? He's underwater with women, with younger voters, with college-educated voters. Most every ethnic group is disappointed in his presence. So this is a problem in some states. And so it could be the case that he uses the vice president spot as a way to be able to make up some ground. Do you think that he does that, or do you think that this is a recipe for him simply to, find somebody else who is equal-minded? And that's just fine, right? Because part of his brand is to be outlandish, right? He wants an outsider. So, an outsider couldn't pick like the 7-term governor of, a state that's the most, sort of conservative place. He's got to find somebody who's moderate, who matches him in terms of his electability. He's got to find somebody who also balances the ticket geographically as well as for gender. So lots of considerations here. So does he use the vice presidential spot as a way to kind of bridge that gap and make some amends for some of these groups?
Now, if you were a conventional candidate and a candidate that we could sort of understand and read, I would say, sure, right? You go out there, you go find someone like Mary Fallin, the governor of Oklahoma. You get regional balance. You desperately need help in terms of sort of shoring up your support among women. But he's Donald Trump, right? I mean, we don't know how he's going to react. I mean, that would be sort of a normal, traditional kind of thing. He's just as likely to select Gary Busey as his vice president. Double down on more Trump all the time. I would ask you, what do you see Clinton doing? How do you see her reacting? How do you see her? Because she'll eventually finish off Bernie Sanders. You'll go into it a little bit like 2008 after California. This thing kind of ends. What does she do? Does she try to make a play for the middle? Does she get try to get a Anglo-Democratic male who can kind of help her in that area? Or does she kind of swing for the fences? Does she double down on getting the Latino support? I mean, what direction do you think she goes?
This is a good question. I mean, there's a case to me, and I think that she should be as outlandish as Trump, be as unpredictable as Trump. If there's one thing that the Clinton campaigns historically have done, it has been very predictable, right? You were in a certain kind of way, and you inform yourself in that way. And I think the problem is that that's going to be too easy to beat. And so she needs to do something, I think, to shake up that phenomenon. So one thing she could do is to pick somebody outside the box in terms of her running mate. But I agree with you. I mean, I think that she needs to pick somebody who balances her well. I mean, I think the fact is, frankly, she's got to choose a man. And I don't know how to register all of the problems that come from this. But the fact is, I think she's got to have somebody who balances her out in terms of gender. Frankly, she doesn't really need to have more of the women's vote. She's going to get that. Right. So she can use the VP ticket to be able to balance it in different ways. Obviously, Latino would be good, or young person would be good, somebody who's got a nice balance in terms of military experience and governing experience. So there are going to be lots of good options, I think. Probably more options for her than for him. And so there will definitely be some usefulness there. But I think she's also going to have to, frankly, at the end of the day, make a play for Sanders voters. And the biggest factor here is, can you find someone who will be a complement to her, but who will also appease the left wing of the party? And that's going to be the real key.
Right. I mean, the name that people talk about is Sherrod Brown, who's the junior senator from Ohio.
Yeah.
The problem with him is if he becomes the vice president, then Governor John Kasich gets appointed replacement,
Right.
and then the Senate is back in play here.
Yeah, the dominoes fall.
Exactly,
yeah.
right? Exactly. And we saw what happened in Massachusetts when Obama did that, when he named John Kerry.
Yeah.
It took them a cycle to get that back, and it cost them Senate support. Yeah. But I think what would be interesting is if instead of her sort of doubling down, rather is to try a double down strategy. What if you go with someone like Elizabeth Warren?
Yeah.
You say, what I really need against Donald Trump is someone who's going to take on Donald Trump in a way that's articulate and strong and just be that foil for me so I get to stay above it.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren has been engaging in a social media war like no one has been able to do against Donald Trump right now.
And holding her own. This is actually a really good point. I mean, if you have her as part of the ticket, there's also consideration for who he chooses. So there's a bit of a brinksmanship here, right? If he chooses first and chooses somebody who is outspoken and as brash as he, finding somebody like Elizabeth Warren who can sort of, take the fight to them would be a really good idea. So part of it is sort of deciding how you put that in the mix, right? What do you think about down ballot races? I mean, we're talking about the Senate, we're talking about sort of what happens if one person goes and you have that kind of reorganization of chairs. Let's talk about the down ballot. I mean, is it the case you think that Trump really does jeopardize the ability for the Republicans to win in the Senate or the House? If you're a House member, can you realistically separate yourself from the rest of the negotiation and discussion from above you? I don't know. I mean, part of me thinks that there's an opportunity there for them to distance themselves. We saw actually this week Will Hurd, who's running for re-election in the 23rd here in Texas, which will be a battleground. He distanced himself from Trump and said, until Trump can sort of mend his ways on this, we should part company. That may not be enough. I don't think it's enough. But we're going to see a lot of this happening. Do you think that that's going to work? Is this something that Republicans can do or not?
I think it's hard.
Yeah.
The Senate, I think, is probably the biggest challenge for them because it was already trending against them just because when you look at who was up, it was primarily states that Obama carried in both 8 and 12. And so you had that natural advantage. The challenge he's going to have is states where there's large Latino populations where the preference has gone aggressively towards the Democrats. You're losing that. But so I'm not sure about that. But what do you think is going to happen locally in Harris County? I mean, do you see the courthouse turning? What do we see happening?
I think that's a good point. This is all going to be about local races. I mean, I think it's true statewide too. You've got lots of different counties who are going to have all these positions that are up, and in Harris County in particular, you've got sheriff's race, which is going to be of interest. You've got all the judicial races which are up. So I think you're going to see a big sea of blue. Harris County traditionally is much more purple and /blue in these elections, and so that's going to be I think the moment. Here's one wild card though. You've got essentially a Republican at the top of the ticket who's not that popular amongst Republicans, especially libertarian Republicans. So what about a third party run, right? What about libertarians doing well locally here in Texas, but also elsewhere, and taking some of the support away from Trump, perhaps actually causing him to lose more support in the places where he otherwise might be strong because of the Republicans sort of peeing off those support. So what do you think about Harris County? What do you think about the third party sort of arrangement?
I think that is going to be a huge issue, and I think the Democrats are going to be very successful in Harris County. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. But thank you for watching the program. Remember to log on to HoustonPublicMedia.org/perspectives every Friday night at 8 p.m. following the 7:30 broadcast of Red, White, and Blue.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next week.